Yes.
Okay, let's get started. So good evening, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Anasak Burley, and I'm an Education USA advisor here at our Islamabad office. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today titled Understanding Graduate Admissions and Financial Aid with the Graduate School at the University at Albany. I would like to thank Soha Costa, Director of Graduate Admissions and Recruitment and Marketing at the Graduate School at the University of Albany, for taking the time out and joining us and leading the session today. Thank you so much, Soha, for coming in and doing the session with us. Before I hand it over to my colleague from the University of Albany, I would like to take a moment to share a bit about what Education USA is doing in the country and worldwide. This is especially for those that are joining us for the first time today. So just please bear with me while I touch on some of the programs and some of the services that we're offering here at Education USA Pakistan and Education USA in general. So Education USA is a global network under the US Department of State, comprising of over 425 international student advising centers in more than 175 countries. We are your official source of US higher education, and we provide you with accurate, current, and comprehensive information related to studying in the US. And we also offer quite a lot of resources. And the best part is that we are free advising services. So please make sure to visit our website, www.educationusa.pk, to sign up for our free advising services and all of our free virtual and in-person events. So
Thank you. Okay, oops, I'm sharing the wrong screen. Hold on, I'll figure this out.
we can see.
Okay. Let me just switch through. Okay, wonderful. Everyone can see the screen. Yay. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining on this important topic regarding funding. It's smart to put funding and creating a strong application to graduate school together, because you can't get funding without a strong application. So at first, I'm going to talk about funding just to make sure we can focus on that, because again, it's very important for all students going to the US for graduate school. And then we will talk about how to make your application, the different parts of the application. I'll touch upon how to make it a strong application. Again, most of the things that you will need to apply for funding are already part of the application. So you want to make sure every single piece of your application is as strong and well thought out as it can be. So we're going to talk a little bit in regards to funding, the sources and types, because there are a lot of different types. It can be a bit confusing to sort of get through and look on websites and figure out which institutions offer what do they call assistantships, some things to consider. And like I said, we'll talk about the actual application to graduate school. So what is graduate funding? This is financial assistance or aid that helps alleviate some, if not all, of the cost of your graduate education. It can come from a few different sources and be in a few different forms. So if you look at our sources, an internal source means that it's coming from the institution, it's associated with institutions. So this is usually scholarships, assistantships, and external sources, usually outside of the university. So maybe looking at some loans, your own family funds, stuff like that. And then we have two different forms. It can either be what we call indirect. So it's tuition or fee waivers. It's money that goes directly to your bill It's funny because I just called it indirect, where you'll see direct is direct payment to you. So some of these could be a combination of both, like an assistantship sometimes is going to pay your tuition bill, but it also has a stipend that's coming directly to you. Scholarships will definitely be indirect because it's just going to be applied to your bill. You're not going to touch any money. Nothing's going to go into your bank account. So just different forms of funding to keep in mind. You can look on the Education USA website for resources on funding, but definitely also look at every institution's website that you're looking to apply to. Most graduate students will apply, I recommend, to at least 6 universities, so 2 safety that you know for sure you can get into, 2 match, and then 2 reach, which means you're looking at least 6 different institutions' web pages. It can be a lot, but as you see when we talk about applying to graduate school, it's like a little mini project. Get a nice Excel open and keep track of this, especially this important information. And you can look for things such as merit funding. So this means that it's based usually on your academics, so maybe your GPA, different kinds of assistantships, which we'll talk about. So a teaching assistantship, that's a TA, research assistantship, or graduate assistantship. Maybe different fellowships, and then opportunities to work on campus, because don't forget, as an international student, you can work on campus for 20 hours a week. And application deadlines for these opportunities may vary from your program deadline. So keep that in mind. That's very important. We have some funding that if you want to be considered for funding in the program, the deadline may be December 15th. Whereas if you don't care about funding, I don't know who doesn't care about funding, it may be in like March. So be very careful with when that deadline is, because usually if you miss a deadline for funding, that's it, because they have so many applications, there's no need for them to extend a deadline. So let's talk about assistantships. This is the most common at the graduate level. These are internal positions to the institution where you are usually given some sort of stipend, so some sort of salary, and then you're offered either partial or full tuition coverage. So it could be maybe at Albany, for example, full-time is 9 credits. It could be you're getting full 9 credits. Some departments I've seen give 12 credits, so they allow you to take even more. Some give only 6 out of 9. So it really depends, and all that information would be outlined in your funding letter. So make sure to always read your funding letter very, very carefully. The different types, like I talked about, are a research assistantship. So you're working in a lab, a teaching assistantship where maybe you're teaching your own course. So you could be teaching undergrads, you could be teaching a big lecture, a lecture class, or you could be helping with a large class, or you could be helping with maybe a lab portion of the class, doing grading, holding office hours, helping the instructor maybe when they're not available. And then some graduate assistantships. Graduate assistantships, I will say, tend to be more, at least at the University of Albany, at the master's level, just because most of our PhD students will receive either a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship. They, again, very, very competitive, but it's because you're usually receiving full funding. A graduate assistantship tends to be a little more administrative. So you're usually working in a different unit from your department. So for example, in the graduate school, we have graduate assistants who help us with recruitment, with our front desk stuff. They help one of our finance directors. So just different roles throughout campus. And those you tend to have to look for more like you're looking for a job. So it's not always offered to you at time of admission, like usually a research assistant or a teaching assistantship is. So graduate assistantship, think of it more of like you're going out and you're seeking and you're applying to these jobs, whereas a research or teaching assistantship, the application may just be within the application to the program. And they usually have a set number of hours per week. Again, it's usually 20 because that's full-time work, usually as a student. And especially for international students, you can't do more than 20 hours. However, I say it's usually 20 because there are some departments at the University of Albany, I'm sure at other universities, where they'll give you a partial assistantship. So maybe it's half-time. So you're only working 10 hours a week and only receiving 6 credits. So again, just make sure you're reading your offer letter if you're offered one of these assistantships. The way you apply to an assistantship is going to vary from every university you apply to. So again, just make sure you're reading the instructions very carefully and make sure you're applying within the deadline to receive an assistantship. So again, how else can you find them? Website, but you can also contact faculty. But I say that with like a very big asterisk because like how you go about contacting faculty can make or break this, right? So some students will reach out and just be like, hey, I need money, I need funding, right? That's not a great way to start a relationship. Think of it as a relationship. So I always advise students that if you're looking for an assistantship, find the 1, 2, or 3 faculty members who have research interests that align with yours and start the conversation that way. This is what I've done. I'm really interested in your program. I see you've done research on X, Y, and Z, and I'm really interested in being a part of that. Are there any funding opportunities in your lab? Or you know what I mean? So it's you don't start right off the bat of like, hey, I need money. Develop that relationship with them. And then it should eventually lead into a conversation like that. The reason I say to have more than one is because one might say, oh, my lab is full, or I don't have funding right now. Another one might say, I just got a grant, I need people in my lab. So reach out in the order you want to work with them. Don't do it all at once. Don't put them all on the same email. Again, just be professional in the way that you are contacting faculty members. And then if you don't get an assistantship in your first semester, especially for master's students, PhD students, you should be getting funding, right? That's the point of a doctorate, is that you help with something while getting your PhD. Master's students, just because it is a little less common to get a full-blown assistantship. If you don't get one in your first semester, that doesn't mean it's over. You can still get an assistantship later on. So you can apply after your first semester, after you make connections with people on campus, after you get more familiar with maybe the job platform. This happens all the time at the university at Albany. So if you get to campus, don't be discouraged. There are definitely still opportunities to find funding. Funding often changes over the course of a degree too, especially for a PhD. So you want to look at things like how many years does it cover? Is it only 2 years? Is it 3 years? 4 years? You also want to know, is it only going to cover your fall and spring semesters, or is this going to take care of you over the summer as well? So you want to make sure that you're reading everything in your offer letter and asking all the questions before you accept anything. Read the terms of the assistantship as well. So is tuition covered? If so, how many credits? How much is the stipend? How many hours a week are you going to be working? Can you hold other jobs on campus? So if the assistantship is 20 hours a week, the answer is no. If the assistantship is 10 hours a week, maybe you can help find another job on campus that helps with a little extra income. And are you expected to work over break? So if it does cover over the summer, are you expected to stay over the summer? And is that something you want to commit to? Or is it that you want to be able to go back home over the summer, over winter break? So all things to consider. So now let's talk about scholarships, fellowships, and grants. There's usually no expectation to repay these, unlike loans, which we'll get to shortly, and usually don't have a service component to them. So usually you're not working when you have a grant, well, a scholarship. A grant you could work, so a little different. But they're commonly awarded to applicants based on merit. So your academics, service, usually it's your GPA. At the University at Albany, we have a scholarship for master's students that's fully based on their GPA. Different attributes, so belonging to maybe a different population, or a certain population. So maybe you bring in diversity to the institution. Maybe it's your field of study. Maybe you're a woman in STEM, and that's something that they're looking for. Or need. So there are grants, fellowships out there that are based on financial need. And they may come from a variety of sources, from your department, maybe the actual school or college that your department's located in, the institution, from professional affiliations or organizations. Maybe there's something in your home country, so Pakistan, that you can apply to that funds you because you're going overseas for a master's. Think of also Fulbright is a good example, right? Super competitive, but they're usually funding your whole degree, which is why it's so competitive. So get creative, look at different options, look at different institutions will have different funds of source, different sources of funds. How to find them? Website Okay, definitely look at on the website, whatever institution you're applying to, do like, for example, Albany funding, and like our funding page will pop up. So start there, because if you start asking questions that are on the website, especially to a faculty member who is very busy, and is like, I have students who can read the website, just make sure you're looking at the website first and then reach out for clarification on things you can't find on the website. Ask other graduate students. So, for example, at the University of Albany, we have students from Pakistan. Ask them what their funding is like, if they're comfortable sharing that. Where did they go? Did they look on a certain web page? Education USA, of course, is going to be a huge, huge help with this. And then look at maybe professional affiliations or organizations. If anyone's working, does your company maybe provide some sort of tuition reimbursement? Will they maybe help with flights or your visa application or taking the GRE? And if you do that with a job, just make sure you read the fine print of like, you have to come back and work for them for a certain amount of years if they are going to help fund your degree. So get creative. A quick Google search usually is a good place to start. It'll give you lots of options, and then you can sort of narrow it down to what applies to you. This is kind of what I just talked about. So again, be creative, do your research, lots of funding opportunities out there. You can definitely find different sources. And then you can work in the US, like I've mentioned, 20 hours a week if you're coming on an F1 student visa and on campus. So it's not like you come and you can't do anything. You can make a little extra money. I always say, though, that a job is not going to be something that's going to pay all of your tuition. It's not going to be something that pays all of your housing, but it is going to help. Maybe it's going to help with groceries. It's going to help with transportation. So just make sure you're keeping a realistic perspective of what it would be like to work on campus and how much money you're going to be making from that. Most institutions have a platform called Handshake. Albany does, where you can go on and you can search for jobs on campus. So the institution that you're applying to likely has Handshake, if not something similar, that will help you find jobs. We have different fairs on campus that help you find jobs, not only on campus, but later on for an internship or for OPT. So many institutions in the US will do the same. Just talked about that. So let's talk about loans. International students can apply for loans through some loan companies. So it's not super common. It's not the best way to go about things. I would say that loans should probably be your last resort, just because this is one that you are going to start to pay an interest on and have to pay back. Some of the loans you'll have to pay back within a certain amount of years. The interest rate will vary. So just make sure you're doing your research. This is the biggest thing. Read the details on the repayment options. Is it like once you graduate, as soon as you get a job? Is it 2 years in? Like, what happens if you can't find a job for a year? So just make sure you're asking all the questions. What's the interest rate? How many hours do you have to be enrolled in to keep this loan? So just a lot of things to consider if you're going to take out a loan. And don't be afraid to ask all the questions, because this is your money that it's going to come out of, right? Especially after you're working, you're looking for a job. You don't want to be stressed with having to repay something. So just make sure you're getting all the information possible if you're planning on taking out loans. So some tips on when applying for funding: make sure your CV or resume is up to date. It's clean, concise. Again, this is something you need for the application in general. So it's not like you're duplicating efforts. You're doing it once and using it for everything. Make sure you discuss everything you want to discuss, and in there discuss why and put in relevant points as to why you're a good fit for whatever assistantship or funding opportunity you're applying to. And maintain academic standing, so your grades, your GPA. That's also true when you are a student. So say you get an assistantship, you usually have to maintain a certain GPA to maintain that assistantship or that scholarship. So for example, the scholarship at UAlbany, you have to maintain a 3.0 or you lose the scholarship. So just get ready to be able to keep up with whatever the requirements are for the funding that you're receiving. Make a good impression. I sort of talked about this when saying, like, when you're reaching out to faculty to talk about it, be professional. Again, in your email, double check for spelling errors. We receive emails where students put in the wrong institution's name. It's just not a good look. It's hard to bounce back from that. So just make sure all of your emails that you're sending out are professional, they're polite, again, free of a lot of spelling errors, grammatically correct. So people have, it's your first impression to them, especially if you're reaching out to talk to them about their research, which hopefully down the line turns into funding. They don't know much about you yet, except for what they're going to read in that email and maybe the resume you attach to it. So just make sure everything is polished. And even if they don't have an opportunity right when you reach out to them, like I said, they might refer you to a different faculty member. Oh, I know this person needs help in their lab. Or when you get there, they're a good resource for you, or they're a good reference, or you take a class with them and you'll be like, hey, remember I emailed you? So just always go into it assuming that you're going to meet this person and put your best foot forward. And again, submit your applications early. Funding deadlines are very early. So some of them can be as early as November, which is in like 2 months. So just make sure you're keeping track of that. Some other items to consider all the expenses, not just tuition. So don't forget there are fees that are associated with it. That's another thing. Is the assistantship or whatever financial sort of assistant you receive going to cover fees? At the University at Albany, our fees are actually waived for doctoral students on assistantships. So that's something you want to read about. Fees can, depending on the institution, can be anywhere from like 1,000 to who knows 3. So just make sure you're taking into consideration any extra fees you might have to pay. Cost of living in the area. So are you getting paid like a $20,000 stipend in New York City? And that's going to get you, I don't know, maybe a bed. So just take into consideration the cost of living and the stipend that you're getting with it. Health insurance, do you have to pay for that? What about any other medical expenses? Do you have medical expenses that you anticipate? Existing debt, so if you already have some debt, take that into consideration. Do you want to take out more loans? And any dependents. International students you can bring a spouse, or children. So if you're going to bring dependents, what additional expense is that going to add to your load? And always ask. The worst that happens is they say no again, and always ask politely. This applies to negotiating, finding funding opportunities, even when you're asking about getting in, all of that stuff. So, and we'll talk about negotiating funding. Oh, here we go. Okay. So funding is often negotiable. Okay. So say you get funding offers from 2 institutions. One is your top choice, one is not. But the one that's not your top choice is giving you more. You can try to negotiate this with your top choice. Okay. You do need more than one offer though. So if you only have one offer, you can't be like, I'm trying to negotiate my funding. That's not how it works. Because sometimes the institutions will ask for the letter from the other one. What are you getting? So you want to make sure you have multiple offers. Explain the circumstances. You can tell them, you're really my top choice, but given the fact that this package is so strong, is there anything else you can do? And maybe it means that they're going to include fees, or they're going to now fund you for the summer, or more credits. So make sure when you're doing this, you're professional. Did we talk about this a little bit? No. Make sure when you're doing this, you're professional, right? You're not talking poorly about another institution. You are not speaking as if the institution you're negotiating with absolutely needs you, right? This is just an opportunity to say like, hey, I really want to come here. Will you match this? I did this when I went to graduate school. I really wanted to go to Chicago. Georgia offered me a better deal. I tried to negotiate it. I had already accepted Georgia when they came back and matched me in Chicago. So I ended up going to Georgia. But it works, right? Like they will come back if they have more money, if they have opportunities to give you additional, again, credits, waive fees, more whatever it is. And a mix of funding may be needed. So if your assistantship is only partial, again, you might need to take out loans, or maybe you can look for other scholarships. But just read the fine print, read everything. Other resources to consider. So ISSS, any International Student Scholar Services office at whatever institution you're applying to might have information about different scholarships available. Education USA, of course. You could look at Fulbright. Get creative, get very creative when it comes to funding. So let's talk a little bit about applying to graduate school. And I'll do this in about 20 minutes so that we have time for questions and answers. Again, almost everything you need to apply for funding, you need for your graduate application. So you're not doing things twice, you're doing it once, you're making it strong, and you're sending that in for both. So each program you apply to, even within the same institution, will require different sets of application materials, but these are usually the most common. So a personal statement, a resume or CV, letters of recommendation, your transcripts, and an application fee. Possible requirements are standardized test scores, so the GRE, GMAT, English scores, and possibly a writing sample or portfolio, or maybe an additional essay or something like that. So the personal statement, you're going to see it called a lot of things depending on where you're applying. Statement of purpose, background of goals. This document is usually 1 to 2 pages unless specified otherwise, where it's your opportunity to speak directly to the admissions committee to tell them why you're a strong candidate for their program. Why are you a strong candidate and why are they a good fit for you? So you're answering both questions. You're tailoring this usually to each program you're applying to. So don't just write one and send it in. It's usually pretty obvious if it's sort of like a template format and you're just changing out the university's name, but you want to use specifics from the website. You want to go on, you want to see what research they're doing, you want to mention faculty members, maybe courses, maybe it's the location, whatever it is. You want to mention specifics about why you are applying to that institution. And again, unless it says otherwise, this is usually 1 to 2 pages. So it's not a ton of space to cover everything you're doing. And you shouldn't cover everything you're doing because you're going to submit a resume. So this is really a time to pluck out what it is you want to highlight and give more detail to those pieces of information. Okay, wait, let me continue. I thought I had another slide. The personal statement, I've seen some faculty members on admissions committees say that they read, before they even look at grades, they read the opening paragraph of the personal statement. And that's how they know if they'll continue on with the application. So you want to make sure from the get-go, again, make sure you're changing out the university's name. Make sure you're writing the university's name correctly. We've gotten Albany University. That's in Georgia. That's not us. We're in New York. So make sure you're looking at everything and proofread, proofread, proofread. So make sure you're looking it over, maybe give it to some friends, family members, Education USA. Take advantage of your resources to make sure that there are no typos, that what you're writing makes sense, that the way that you're structuring it makes sense, because this is a very important part of the application. A resume or a CV, you guys know what this is. Everyone might not have a CV. I just like to mention that. So if you don't, that's okay. Just upload a resume. And on your resume, you don't want to put like every single thing you've ever done in your life, right? Put the things that are relevant. That might be a lot of things. That might be a few things. But anything past also high school, so anything at university level is what you want to include there. If you've done research, for sure include that. If you've been published, definitely include that. Your education. Some things to not include when applying to institutions in the US specifically is we don't need a photo on your resume. We don't need your marital status or your sex, anything like that. Really just name, email address, and then you can start the content of it. Make sure to include where you got your bachelor's. You can include your GPA on there if you'd like. Just make sure it matches what's going to show up on your transcripts. And then you can get into your work experience. You can do volunteer experience if it's applicable. Again, honors, awards, stuff like that. Letters of recommendation. Woo. So the number of letters of recommendation will vary. So again, even at the same institution, at the University at Albany, for example, data science requires 1, public administration requires 2, and most others require 3. So even at the same university, the number of letters of recommendation will vary. So just make sure you're reading that carefully. It's typically going to come from a faculty member that can speak to your academic ability and maybe your maturity to be in graduate school, maybe your ability to do research. A supervisor, a colleague may be acceptable if you're going into more of a professional program, but again, make sure you're reading the instructions. Some programs may say 3 letters, 2 need to be academic, 1 can be someone else. Some may say all 3 need to be academic. If it doesn't specify, preferably go for academic references over, like I said, a supervisor or colleague or anything like that. Definitely no family member recommendations. So focus on faculty who can speak to your ability to do graduate level work. Who should you ask for a letter? Again, it should be someone that you have a relationship with that can speak to your abilities. So not someone who's going to write a very generic letter of recommendation. It shouldn't look like a template. It should really be specific to you and your strengths, and why you're a good fit for the program. It could be someone in your related field. It could be someone outside of your field. Again, unless the instructions specify otherwise, it's up to you. And again, some programs may say we want someone from psychology, for example. We want a psychology faculty. So just make sure you're reading instructions. If you don't know any professors, get to know them. If you're graduated already, you may have to work backwards and sort of go and see maybe whose class did you do well in? Who did you have an interaction with? When going to ask for letters of recommendation, I recommend you bring your resume and possibly your personal statements to give to them, so that they can kind of see what you've done outside of their class. So if they only know you in the classroom or in the lab, giving them a resume will let them say, oh, they also volunteered at this place, or they've been involved here. It's stuff that they maybe might not know, just from you being in an academic setting with them, and then they could speak to that a little bit as well. Don't forget to say thank you to them too. It's nice for them to get a little thank you note when they do it. And keep in mind that you're usually not receiving a physical letter from them. So we say letters of recommendation, but usually the way it works is you're going to put in their information into a system, and that system is going to email them and say, hey, so-and-so said that you would write a letter of recommendation for them. Here are the instructions on how to do it. So you're not physically getting something to upload. And the reason for that is because if you're opening a letter of recommendation, that's usually not a great thing, right? They want it to be confidential. You will be asked if you want to waive your right to see the letters. I recommend you waive the right to see the letters because it gives them a little bit more weight. If an admissions committee is looking at your application and they say you didn't waive your right, they may say, why? Did they want to see if the professor was going to write something odd? Are they keeping an eye out for something? So when you have the option to waive the letter of recommendation, I recommend that you do. And then transcripts. So most, actually, if applying for a graduate degree, we don't need high school transcripts. It's university beyond. And the type of transcript that an institution needs will vary. So what do I mean by that is if they will let you apply with unofficial documents or official documents. So University at Albany, at time of application, we'll take unofficial documents. If you decide to enroll, then we ask for your official transcripts, and official means that they are coming directly from your university. Or if you're bringing them, they are coming in a signed and sealed envelope that you have not opened. So make sure, again, you're reading the instructions because this might delay your process. If an institution needs official documents, it might take a little while for your university to get those, and you need to factor that in for deadlines. Some institutions will require a WES evaluation. We don't unless you're applying through SOFA, so public health, but we usually do not ask for a WES evaluation up front. And then possibly standardized test scores. So more and more institutions are moving away and programs are moving away from requiring a GRE, a GMAT, LSAT and MCAT are definitely still required for law school and medical school. But make sure you're reading the instructions. Some will say recommended, but not required. Some it's just not required. Some maybe it's required, but it's waived if you have a certain GPA or if you submit some sort of a document requesting the waiver with some proof. So just make sure you're taking a look at that. The IELTS, English scores, IELTS, TOEFL, Duolingo, PTE, whatever it is, make sure you're, again, reading which institutions require it, which institutions don't, especially if you're from Pakistan. Some institutions might waive it if you're from Pakistan. Some institutions might say as long as your university was all taught in English. It really varies. And obviously the required score may vary. Another thing to keep in mind while I said this is the required score for English might vary based on if you need if you want an assistantship or not. So for example, maybe because you're going to be a teaching assistant, they want a way higher TOEFL score than if you weren't applying for funding. So just keep in mind, make sure you're looking at that. Does your funding application require a higher score than maybe the normal application? And then some other things that may be required, again, only read instructions. That's the only way you're going to know if something else is required. A writing sample, a portfolio. I've seen some PhD programs ask for a research proposal up front. So it really varies. If you're going into an art program, if you're going into maybe an English program, they might ask for a different writing sample. Okay. So a little bit about you, Albany. Here we are. And then I promise I'll open it up to questions. The university at Albany is part of the SUNY system. My slide looks all wonky, but that's okay. We're a Research One institution. So we put out as much research as Ivy League, so Harvard, Stanford, those places. So really great place if you want to do research, if you want to be involved at that level. We're located in Albany, New York, so we're 2.5 hours from New York City. Albany is the capital of the state, so everyone thinks it's New York City. It's not. Albany is. We're smaller. We're like the fourth, I think we're the fourth largest city in New York State, so not even second. But with that comes the fact that you won't get lost. Cost of living is much lower. It's about a third that of New York City. And again, the university itself is like its own little place within the city. Which is nice. It's about 17,500 students, so not ginormous, like some institutions in the US have 30, 50,000 students, and not small. Of that 17,500, about 4,500 are graduate students. All of that to say is that as a grad student, you are in a much smaller population, which is nice. You really get to know your cohort. You really have opportunities to take advantage of getting to know faculty. Your classes are much smaller. And we do have funding available for international students. Like I mentioned, the scholarships, and then international students can apply for any of our assistantships as well. Yay, I did it. I left time. I saw a lot of hands being raised, so I was like, let me leave a little bit more time. But if you have any questions, feel free to scan this QR code. It's the link that I put in the chat box, which I can put in again. It'll get you more information from us. It'll get information about whichever program you pick. You'll start getting emails about that. Different events that we're doing, webinars. We do a whole webinar on writing your personal statement, applying to graduate school. So different resources in addition to what you use Education USA for. So with that, should we open it up to questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for such an insightful presentation. We don't really have a lot of questions, and we still have like 20 more minutes left, so we can just go through all of those questions one by one. I can just try to moderate and yeah. So I think most of our questions relate to the funding process and just reaching out and asking. So I think the first question is that when is the right time to ask for detailed information about any kind of funding, especially in a humanities program? So before the application process, should they, reach out before the application process or after? Since applications take so much time and the application fee is usually very high, it would be unwise to apply to a school for limited funding options that are available. So somebody's wondering about that. So should they ask before? When should they reach out? And yeah.
That's a good question and all very good points. So I would recommend what you can do is at most institutions, you can start an application without paying the application fee. So you can upload your personal statement, you can upload your resume. The reason I say you might want to do that is because if you reach out, for example, the first thing I do when someone reaches out to me is I go and I look, did they apply? What information do I have on them? And even if they didn't apply, they didn't pay the application fee, because you're right, it's going to be expensive to pay all these application fees. At least I can be like, oh, they have a personal statement. Let me look at that. Let me read that. Let me see what they're interested in and see if we're going to be a good fit. So that's a good way to start it. If you can't just start an application without paying it, you can reach out before you apply. You can say, I plan on applying. Again, here's my research. This is what I'm interested in. You know what I mean? What I caution against is saying, I'm only going to apply if you give me funding. So again, just start that conversation and you can say, my plan is to apply. Trying to get as much information as possible. I want to talk to faculty. That's not abnormal, especially for PhD students, to start conversations with faculty members before they apply.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And we're getting quite a lot of questions now, all of a sudden.
Yay!
So we'll quickly go through all of them one by one. So quite a lot of people are asking about getting application fee waivers.
Mm.
Is that possible? I think especially for those students who also have the demonstrated need.
Mhm.
So is that possible at U Albany?
Yeah, so at the University at Albany, there are different ways to get an application fee waiver. I will say we don't have a ton, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible. I will also say that similar to like asking for funding, don't just reach out and say, I need an application fee waiver. You can discuss like maybe why you need the application fee. Again, is it need-based? What is it? We get a lot of emails that are just like 2 lines, again, to like in the 2 box, it's to like 20 different institutions. It doesn't look personal. It doesn't look like you really are interested in the university. And this goes across the board. Some institutions might have like a form you have to fill out where you have to put in certain information. Some institutions only waive it if you're a part of certain programs. So it's going to vary, but it doesn't hurt to ask.
Okay, thank you. And so we also have a lot of questions related to maximizing their chances of getting funding. Does their GRE scores or their TOEFL scores, do they play a part when it comes to their funding? Is that something?
GRE scores potentially, if the program requires a GRE, it could be that they're looking for a specific score. And if that information is not on the web page, you can always reach out and ask them that question. I don't know that TOEFL scores will increase your chances. Like I mentioned, it might just be like if you're applying for a TA, they might want your scores to be higher because you're going to be teaching students. Um, I don't know that anyone's like, oh, they got a 120 on the TOEFL, I'm going to give them funding. It's usually based on maybe again your GRE score or your GPA, what courses you've taken, maybe if you already have teaching experience. Especially for a research assistantship, it's going to be all about that relationship. Does the faculty member have space in their lab? Is there a need for a research assistant? Do they feel like you're going to be a good fit in their lab? Are you going to be productive there? Are you going to, again, does your research align with what they're doing? So it's all about also a good fit when it comes to at least a research assistantship as well.
Okay. And we have another comment slash question. So if you've been working for about 2 to 3 years, but you're still an early stage professional, will an academic reference still hold enough weight? Or would two professional references be preferred if you've been out of college for quite a while?
If you're applying for a PhD program, an academic reference will always hold weight. Always. Always, always, always. If you have been out, we get this question a lot of like, I've been working, I don't have contact with my professors. That's where you want to, again, read the website. If there's nothing that specifies all 3 need to be from an academic source or 2 out of the 3 need to be from it, then maybe you decide what's best for you is that maybe you only get 1 academic reference and 2 professional ones because you've been working more. And when you get 2 professional ones, they shouldn't only talk about how you are good at the job. They should be talking about how you're good at the job and how that applies to the graduate program. That's the big thing, right? They're not just writing a reference of like, you did really great in the training, you did really great at meeting your numbers, whatever it is. They should be saying they were really good in training and it's because they created the PowerPoint, which is really what you need for graduate school. You know what I mean? Like they should be tying it back to your ability to be a graduate student.
Awesome, thank you. And so Salman was asking that is TOEFL the only test that you guys accept, or is IELTS or Duolingo also
Yep,
accepted?
all of those. We accept TOEFL, IELTS, Duolingo, and PTE.
Okay. And another question is that, so if the car wants to know that they want to apply for an environmental engineering program for masters and they want to be considered for research assistant, TA, or a graduate assistantship, do they have to contact professors for acceptance for those things as well? Or they just need to apply directly and they will be considered for assistantships?
I would do a little bit of both. So in our application, there's an application for an assistantship. So you want to fill that out for sure to be considered, but it doesn't hurt to also just reach out and say, hey, I plan on applying, just so that maybe when they're reviewing your application, they're like, oh, I remember that name. They emailed me. They're really interested in this. And we had a really nice conversation. So it doesn't hurt to do a little bit of both.
Okay, perfect. And another question is that will funding differ from program to program, or is it like one universal institutional for
Great
everyone?
question. It's different for every single program. So the stipend level is different at the University of Albany. The stipend level is different for each program. It depends on how big the program is. Again, just like what the funding looks like at the university, what the needs are within that department. The amount of credits that they cover is different, even within the same program. So within the same program, usually the stipend is the same. What you're doing could be different. The amount of credits that they cover could be different. And it all depends on the funding source. So at the University of Albany, it could be that you're getting a TA. That's usually pretty standard. It could be that you're on a research assistantship directly through the University of Albany. Could be that you're on a research assistantship through the Research Foundation, which is different. They're a different foundation. They're a nonprofit associated with the SUNY system. It could be that you're on a grant that the professor themselves has money from. So it really all depends on your funding source. That's why you always want to read the stipulations, what they're covering, read it very, very, very carefully, and then read it again just to make sure.
And keeping in consideration the equity, diversity, and inclusion aspects that you guys are following, so are students or can students from disadvantaged and underdeveloped, areas such as, Balochistan or other minority ethnic group, can they sort of also get funding based on that? Or
Good
is it just
question.
usually based on their academic or demonstrated need?
It's a good question. Right now, for international students, it's not based on their diverse background. It's usually the assistantships that are based on academics, research, that kind of stuff. We do have some fellowships that are for diversity, but they're for domestic diversity. So it's for students in the US who have backgrounds like that meet the diversity of the department or the program. So, and by meet, will contribute to the diversity of the department, the program, and the university. But right now, for international students, we don't have anything to delineate diversity from different countries.
Okay. And Alishba was wondering if having work experience in the exact same field that you're planning to apply to, would that have a positive impact on the chances of securing merit-based scholarships for master's program?
It could. It definitely could. You want to highlight that resume, personal statement, and it depends on the kind of scholarship that you're applying to. So you might find a scholarship where it's based on your work experience. Some scholarships are literally only based on academics and are only based on your GPA. So it really depends on the type of scholarship you're applying to. But it definitely doesn't hurt in your application to highlight that because it clearly shows that you have a demonstrated interest in the field you want to pursue.
Perfect, thank you. And another really popular question seems to be that, is the university at Albany offering any sort of GRE waivers for students who are currently interested in master's program? And what are the scholarship prospects for programs like data science and data analytics and STEM designated programs in general?
So I will say most of the master's programs at the university at the University of Albany don't require a GRE. If it says that they require the GRE on the website, some ones that I can think about are like digital forensics and cybersecurity. They are actually looking at waiving that. So that should hopefully be waived for fall 2025. But the University of Albany is one of those institutions that has been looking at if the GRE is really required and what it measures. And a lot of our programs have already waived it. So just make sure data science doesn't require it, information science doesn't require it. And then scholarships we have scholarships for all master's programs, so STEM designated, not STEM designated alike. That's $5,000 a year, and that's based on merit, so your GPA. And if you have what's equivalent to a 3.0 out of 4.0, you're automatically awarded that $5,000 scholarship.
Okay. And somebody was wondering, they used to be a chemistry graduate, but they now want artificial intelligence or any other department. So is it possible to change their field now? And if it'd be great if you could also comment on the turn towards interdisciplinary curriculum and incorporating maybe like something that incorporates more than just one discipline. Is that possible for
Yes,
students?
good question. So you don't have to get a master's or a PhD in the field you got your bachelor's in. So this happens all the time, where students are like, oh, I got my bachelor's in this, but I'm really interested in this. The only thing that you need to do is explain why. So if you're coming from a chemistry background and now you want to go into information science, why? What made you change that? Because something made you change your mind, right? So was it a work experience? Was it the fact that you went to a really great like workshop, or is that you in your undergrad you had a little taste of it, but you were in your senior year and it was too late to change? So like, what is it that made you decide to change from your bachelor's program to what you want to pursue in your master's? And explain that thoroughly in your personal statement. That's where you're going to do it, so that the committee understands your decision and doesn't think you just applied to the wrong program by accident. And then you can look, like you said, for interdisciplinary programs. So interdisciplinary programs will allow you to have that as a master's, but then give you a little more leeway to take courses in other departments, so that you can collaborate a little bit more. You can get exposure to other fields, to other subjects, to other faculty members. And that might be an interesting way to go. Some fields are more interdisciplinary than others. Like, for example, computer science is not so interdisciplinary. It's like you're taking computer science courses for your electives. They give you a list of ones that you can choose from, and that's about it. But information science is very interdisciplinary. So it really will depend also on what you decide to do for your graduate degree.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for answering that. And another really popular and frequently asked question that we get all the time is, so are scholarships and funding, are they like renewed and awarded on an annual basis? What is the process of renewing that once you
Yeah.
received it?
It depends. So, for example, scholarships at the University at Albany are reviewed on a semester basis. You have to maintain a 3.0 every semester, and your GPA is looked at, and you can lose it if you drop below that 3.0. Funding, so like an assistantship, is usually given for a year. So fall and spring semester, potentially summer. Again, that's all stuff that will vary. And then can be renewed for the following year based on funding in the department. However, upfront, you might get a letter that states, we're going to fund you for 3 years, and this is what you have to maintain a 3.0, whatever it is. Some might say you're only going to be funded for this academic year, pending funding and whatever for the next year. It varies very much. It's going to vary from program to program, let alone institution to institution. So that's why you want to read your funding offer, whether it's an assistantship offer, a scholarship offer, whatever offer it is. If it has money attached to it, make sure you're reading what's required.
Perfect. And Umar Heather was wondering if it is good to reach out to a professor after he has submitted his application, or should he do that before?
So
Before
that,
submitting the application.
yeah, like I said, I think that's your choice. Like someone mentioned earlier in their question of like, it can cost a lot of money to pay for these, and then you reach out and then maybe you lose that money because they don't have funding. So you could try to do it beforehand. Like I said, maybe start the application and upload some of your materials so they can just see something of your background as they're talking to you. Or if you know for sure you want to go to this institution, you can apply and then reach out.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I believe we can just take one last question and then we can end the session. Let me just quickly go through all the questions.
We went from a few to a whole bunch of questions. I love it.
Yeah, there are quite a lot of questions in the chat box still now. I think quite a lot of people are also wondering about study gap and how they can sort of explain that and justify that in their statements or their
Mhm.
personal statements or
Yeah.
their motivation letters.
Yeah, I think if you have a gap in your study, you're hopefully doing something else that made you take that gap. So you're working, which means you can definitely talk about that. Maybe you're studying abroad. Maybe you're just taking a year off to figure out what you want to do. Whatever it is, you can discuss it and you can relate it to your graduate experience. So even if it's just that you're taking a gap year to just like sit there and figure out what you want to do, you can say that like and it doesn't have to be like 2 pages long. It could be 3 sentences. I took some time off to really research and figure out what it is I want to pursue. And I decided that it's this because eventually I want to do this. So it's always whatever it is that you've done, when you mention it, you relate it back to the graduate program you are applying to and that institution. As long as it's relevant, put it in there. You don't want to leave if you've taken like 3 years off. You don't want to leave it to the imagination of like, oh, why? So you should address it. But again, it doesn't have to be even one full paragraph. It can just be 2 or 3 sentences, and then that's it.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you so much for answering all the
Yeah,
questions.
of
With
course. Thank
that,
you.
our session comes to an end. Again, thank you so much, Saha, for such an informative and engaging session. It was
Thank
lovely
you.
hearing you. And I am certain that all of our participants found the information and, the techniques that you were sharing very useful, insightful. And we hope to have more sessions with you moving forward. If you guys have any questions about today's session or any questions about US higher education in general, please feel free to reach out to your EducationUSA advisor. Make sure to sign up for our free advising services. So the website is www.educationusa.pk. Please register for our free advising services. We're always here to help you. And like I said previously, we're like a free advising services. So yeah, we're always here to help you guys out. So if you have any questions after this session, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Also, do not forget to keep following our EducationUSA social media pages to stay up to date on all of our events and happenings, and our USCFP pages as well to stay updated when it comes to fully funded programs and scholarships like the Fulbright and the, quite a lot of other programs that we're doing. And thank you very much for joining and participating. Once again, thank you so much, Soho, for leading the session,
Thank
and
you.
I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.